Morning, everyone.
Good morning.
For those of you who don't know me, my name is Darren. I'm the kind of pastor that your pastor used to warn you about. And what I do on a Sunday morning is I teach unchurchy people the Bible. Just before I get into that, I should say that if this is your first ever visit to our church here, I know how hard it is to go to church for the first time, or for the first time in a long time. So if that's you, I'm thrilled that you're here. I really don't care what your religious background is or what your moral circumstances happen to be. I'm just glad you're here, and I really hope it works for you. And you've picked a great day to come, I think, because today we're starting a new series called Faith That Works. Over the next few weeks, I'm going to talk about what spirituality would look like if we stripped away some of the complicated, unnecessary bits. Now, just so that we're all on the same page with this, when I talk about a person who is spiritual, I'm talking about a person who believes that there's more to life than this. And when I talk about a person's spirituality, I'm talking about the way in which that person organizes their life in the light of what they believe. And for some people, that organization is incredibly complicated. For example, this is a Hindu holy man, a sadhu, and part of his spirituality involves getting his body into various contorted positions. I don't care how bendy you are, that's got to hurt. In this next photo, you can see a group of Muslims, Shia Muslims in this case, and part of their spirituality involves hurting themselves with whips. We don't do that on a Sunday, you'll be glad. Once you've been a month, we introduce you to that on a Tuesday night. It's good fun. Over 18s only. In this next photo, you can see a woman in the lotus position, and she's meditating. She's got crystals round her neck. She's channeling peace and energy and whatever into her life. She is in such a state of zen that she is unaware of the fact her roots are showing, which is good. Spirituality is good for you. Finally, coming to a dark church also works. Next slide, we got some Amish people, lovely people, and as you no doubt know, part of their spirituality, part of the way they organize their religious belief is by wearing dark Victorian clothes, shunning technology, etc., etc. So you get the idea. A spiritual person is a person who believes there's more to life than this, and a person's spirituality is a way that they then organize their life in the light of what they believe. So spiritual is what you believe, spirituality is what you do. With me so far? Okay. That wasn't very encouraging, but I don't care. Now, for the purposes of this series, I'm going to assume that you're a spiritual person. So I'm going to assume that in the most general sense, you believe there is more to life than this. And I'm going to further assume, again in a very general sense, that you are spiritual in a Christian kind of way. So you believe that there's a God, you believe in Jesus, you believe the Bible is a special book, all that kind of stuff. So in that sense, at the moment, I assume you have a spiritual belief. And for the next few weeks, I want to talk about how your spiritual belief might be organized into some kind of faith that works, some kind of faith that makes sense in our 21st century culture. And as a basis for that talk, I want to read from one of the oldest parts of the New Testament. It was written by this man. He's the man being strangled in this image. Slightly S&M theme going on here today, I think. His name was James. And in the early days of the church, like right after Jesus died, James wrote a letter to a group of Christians. And that letter is an amazing explanation of what Christianity looks like when it's simple. Of what Christianity looks like when all the unnecessary BS is removed from it. And I'm really excited to be teaching you from this part of the Bible. It's one of my favorites, so let's get straight to it. First verse up on the screen, please, lads. So these words come from the New Testament book of James, chapter 1 and verse 1, where the writer introduces himself as James, a servant of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ. So right at the start of the letter, we get an insight into what James's worldview is. His self-understanding is that he is in some kind of a relationship with Jesus, and the important thing for him about that relationship is that it is not one of two equal parties. His self-understanding is that as he organizes his life, Jesus is very much his boss. And this is a big point for James. The faith that he wants his readers to practice is one which continually tries to figure out how a person might live their life on those terms. How a person might say, okay, so I believe in God, I believe in Jesus, I believe the Bible's a special book. Now, how do I do life in such a way that reflects the fact I think Jesus is boss? And then after this, he mentions that he's writing to a group of people whom he calls the 12 tribes scattered among the nations. Now, when the Christian church first kicked off after the death of Jesus, it was pretty much centered in Israel and Jerusalem. And for about 10 years or so, the church stayed there. For the first 10 years of its history, the Christian movement was almost entirely found in Israel, in Jerusalem. It was small, it was cozy, they ate baklava, it was very nice. And then in the early 40s of the first century, there was a huge economic meltdown in Israel. Now in those days, the world economy wasn't a world economy, it wasn't globalized. So this meltdown in the Jewish economy, well, it was just Jewish, what am I saying? I should look at my notes. So, in the early 40s in Israel, the economy tanked. People lost their homes, people lost their jobs, people lost their businesses. And so consequently, people left Israel in droves and became economic migrants. They travelled all over the world in search of better financial times. And so making this reference in this sentence to 12 tribes who are scattered, James is giving his readers a heads up that he knows full well how difficult their life has been of late. He knows that they've lost their jobs. He knows that the bank has foreclosed on them. He knows that they've had to leave friends and family and go all over the world looking for better stuff and better prospects. And in some ways, I think James would say that doesn't matter. The point being, guys, I'm talking to you about faith today. I'm talking to you about living your life with Jesus as your boss. And that talk is always applicable regardless of your current circumstances. But let's acknowledge those circumstances. Let's talk about them. And so he says, consider it pure joy, my brothers, whenever you face trials of many kinds. The word trials in this sentence basically refers to those times in life that push you to the limit. You know the times of which I speak, right? And notice that he talks about those difficulties as though they were inevitable. So clearly, to have a simple spirituality, to have a common sense faith that works, is not the same as looking at the world through rose-tinted spectacles, or to believe things that just aren't true. To say, hey, welcome to church everyone, Jesus will make everything okay, and God will always give you victory over your problems, and God is good all the time, is neither true nor biblical. So notice the sheer common sense of this biblical version of Christianity. There is no wishful thinking about the positive effect that faith will and will not have. Rather, that there is a simple, honest recognition that to live in this world is to often find yourself pushed to the limit. Sometimes your family can push you to the limit. Sometimes your children can push you to the limit. Sometimes illness can push you to the limit. Money can push you to the limit. Do you know what I mean? Life takes you to the edge all too often. There's always something in life that makes life much harder than you wish it were. And yet, curiously, James says, when life pushes you to the limit, I want you to derive a little bit of happiness from that. Not because of your current difficulties, certainly not. but because you know that in your current difficulties, something helpful is happening to you. And that is, you know that the testing of your faith develops perseverance, and perseverance must finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. So I think that this is new and challenging information. Challenging because to us the concept of happiness is always understood within a narrow framework. So if someone were to ask us, are we happy? We'd say, well, let me just do a quick stock take. I've got my health, I've got a job, I've got plenty of money, my kids just got into a good university, I won the lottery last week and I'm going to Cancun for March break. So yeah, I think I'm happy, everything's going well. The faith that we read of in the Bible understands happiness in a much wider sense. When he talks here about being mature and complete and not lacking anything, he's saying that there's a happiness to be derived from knowing that your life is progressing to something better, something deeper. And ultimately in the biblical story, that something better and something deeper is that thing that is experienced 5 minutes after you're dead. When Jesus welcomes you into heaven, and then for the first time you actually experience all the things that you always believed and thought were true. And for James, when life pushes you to the limit, when life takes you to the edge and causes you to question everything you believe, it is helpful in this regard. And this is why when he talks about the testing of your faith, he uses a very specific Greek word. The word testing that he uses here is a first century Greek word, dokimos. And in the first century, this is a word that was mainly used in the precious metal business. So a miner would dig up a lump of rock in the desert and would take that lump of rock to a goldsmith and would say, hey, Mr. Goldsmith, I've got some gold ore here. So you have to give me $1,300 an ounce for it, because this is gold, this is worth a fortune. At that point, the goldsmith will say, well, okay, I want to believe you, I'm a trusting guy, but I don't know if this is really gold. And so I need to dokimos this. I need to test it. And in testing it, I need to do something very specific. What I need to do is I need to turn up the heat. Do you ever feel that life turns up the heat on you? Do you ever feel that the powers that be in the universe are saying, this should be fun? Let's see what happens to them now. So, next slide. Yes, this is a gold smelter in South Africa, I think. So what happens is gold ore goes in one end, and the heat gets turned up, and all the impurities are taken away. It's a very traumatic process, a very violent process, a very unpleasant process, actually. However, at the end of the process, what you're left with is pure gold, something very valuable, something very desirable. James is saying that in your hardships, unpleasant though they are, unwelcome though they are, something nonetheless good is happening to you. You're being refined. Value is being added to your life. Crap is being removed. Insecurities are being stripped away. Nonsense that you don't need is being taken from you. You're being changed from this into this. From what you are into what you will be. And so in causing his church to think about this, James is saying, don't you want to get better at following Jesus? Don't you want to get better at having a faith that makes sense in this world? Don't you want to be the man or the woman that you can be, that you should be, that God desires you to be? Well, if that is so, you now have some reason to be happy in hardships, because God is giving to you something that you hitherto lacked. A little bit of mettle, a little bit of perseverance. And at the end of that road, 5 minutes after you're dead, James would say, is a life of pure gold in heaven. Now, having said that, he then goes on to say, so if any of you lacks wisdom, fairly easy to follow his train of thought here, because when life gets difficult, one of the things we often say is, I don't know what to do. I used to know what to do. When I had plenty of money and when all my relationships were working and when I had my health and all that, I understood how to live. But when everything started to fall apart, when life got difficult, suddenly I find myself not knowing. This is what happens when life spins out of control. We feel afraid, we feel guilty, and we have more questions than answers, and clarity of thought is often one of the first casualties. And so James says, if you're in that situation, lack wisdom. Now, notice that he uses the word if. If any of you lack wisdom. When he uses this word, he's not suggesting that only some people, only a stupid select few, lack wisdom. What he's saying is that wisdom is essential if you're going to conduct yourself properly through the difficult times of your life. And to use the word conduct quite deliberately, because the word wisdom in the Bible never refers to the facts that a person knows. It always refers to the way that a person lives. So a wise person in biblical thought isn't a person with lots of degrees and with lots of letters after the name or anything like that. It's always a person who lives properly, who always seems to know what the right thing is to do and proceeds to do it. And that knowing and that doing is never more elusive than during those periods of life when you're stressed out and pushed to the limit. And so James says, in your desire to have a faith that works, if you lack wisdom, then what you should do is you should ask God for it, who gives generously. Now, the word generously that James uses here is an interesting word. It means simply. Better way of phrasing it than that. It means no-brainer. That's what it means. So this is a word you would use if your friend was working on his car in his garage and he got to a part of the job where he needed some help, and so he picked up the phone and he said, hey, I'm working on this job, I'm trying to change the water pump, I'm stuck, could you come and give me a hand? And if you had the tools, and if you knew how to do that kind of thing, and if you had the time, and if your wife would let you, you'd just say, sure, it's a no-brainer. No problem. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to work it out. You just go. It's simple to you. This is the word that James uses. If you don't know what to do and you don't know how to do it, ask God. He's generous with that stuff. It's a no-brainer for him. And notice he qualifies this by saying that God gives help to people without finding fault. I always seem to go on about this in church because I think it's important. God doesn't find fault with you. God doesn't keep score. So when we go to God, there's never a sense of him saying, really? Should you not know better by now? Haven't we been through this already? Didn't you already get this wrong 1,000 times? Why are you coming to me on time 1001? None of that. If you are to have a faith that works, you should know that God is committed to you, that he is rooting for you, guiding you safely towards your future. All you need to do is ask, according to James. However, regarding that asking, he says that he who asks must believe and not doubt, because he who doubts is like a wave of the sea, blown and tossed by the wind. That man should not think he will receive anything from the Lord. He's a double-minded man, unstable in all he does. Now, when James talks about having doubt, he's not talking about having questions. He's not talking even about being slightly skeptical about some of the aspects of our faith. Christianity, remember, is not a brainwashing religion, and it is not, or at least it ought not to be made insecure by questions and doubt. And in this particular church, we're definitely a thinking church. Doubts are welcomed. In fact, doubts are encouraged. If you ever go to a place of faith and questions are frowned upon and doubts are frowned upon and skepticism is frowned upon, I think that's a sign that you're in quite a sketchy organisation. Why be so insecure about questions? Why be so insecure about doubts? Probably because you've got something to hide, I think. Anyway, so that's not what he means by talking about doubt in this sentence. When he talks about doubt, he's talking about a person who, on the one hand, he's not talking about a person, he's talking about you, he's talking about me. He's talking about all of us. He's talking about what we're like when, on the one hand, we want to be good, but on the other hand, we don't. He's talking about us when we're like the prayer of St. Augustine. Remember the famous prayer of St. Augustine? A prayer always prayed on a Friday night. Lord, make me pure, but not tonight. Let's start work on that tomorrow morning. This is what he's referring to here. He's saying that in the pursuit of a faith that works, you have to genuinely want it. You have to genuinely be at a place where you're saying, God, I seriously want to know what the right thing for me to do is. And knowing it, I then want to seriously go ahead and do it. I don't want to be two people anymore. I want to be better. And then having said that, James then gives an example of what this kind of wisdom might look like. And as an example, he talks about money. And I suppose I'm glad that he does, because when life gets hard, money's always, not always, it's often one of the things that causes it to get hard. And for many of James's original audience, money was desperately tight. Let me say three things about money in our culture. Number one, I think that money in our culture is an indicator of personal worth. In our conversations, we always draw a connection between a person's worth and a person's finances. And so we say things like, see that guy over there? He's worth a fortune. Or we get very excited when our daughter dates some rich person, because we're like, oh, he's dating that, she's dating that guy, and he's worth a lot of money. We do this in our head without thinking about it. We draw a connection between what a person is worth and how much a person has. Secondly, I think in our culture, money gives us security. When times get hard, so when the bank raise interest rates or when there's a recession, if we've got a lot of money, we're not really all that bothered because we're safe. But if we don't, then we feel scared. This is why when business gets slow or when we lose our jobs, we feel panicky, because in our culture, money and security are very, very closely connected. And thirdly, most obviously, money gives us huge advantages over other people. That's one of the best things about it, right? If we have money, we can live in better homes than they do. It's fantastic. We can go on better vacations than they can. Even on planes, we can. Isn't it cruel, by the way, when you get onto a plane, they make you, they don't have to, they make you walk through first class. They should just put up a sign that says, these are the seats you could have sat in if you weren't such a loser. These people who are more successful and intelligent than you will be having a better journey. Ponder this as you make your way to the back of the plane. Right? And it's great. I'd love it if I sat in first class. I got on the plane early just so I could watch people walk by. Anyway, no, I wouldn't. I'm not that kind of guy. So those are the cultural assumptions, and they were as true in the first century as they are in the 21st. And speaking into those assumptions, James gives an example of what wisdom looks like when money gets tight. So he says, the brother in humble circumstances ought to take pride in his high position. So here's a piece of wisdom. When times are hard, you should know and never forget that your worth and your income are totally unrelated. When James talks about a person in humble circumstances, he's talking in his culture about a person who has nothing. And notice that regardless of the nothing that this person has, he's very careful to say this person is a brother. He is one of us. This person whom your culture would label as a coach sitter, as an unemployed person, as someone who struggles, is in this place of faith a person for whom God sent his son Jesus to die. A person whose life is of incalculable worth. In biblical thought, there's never a connection, ever a connection, between a person's financial status and a person's worth. Here's another piece of wisdom. Money and security are not as closely connected as we all tend to imagine. James reminds his readers that riches don't last forever. And so he says, in quite flowery language, the one who is rich should take pride in his low position, because he will pass away like a wild flower. For the sun rises with scorching heat and withers the plant. Its blossom falls and its beauty is destroyed. In the same way, the rich man will fade away, even while he goes about his business. In other words, church, here's a news flash. One day you're going to die. You really are. And that being the case, the greatest thing in your life, the thing that is of greatest worth to you, simply cannot be the funds that you're not going to be able to take with you anyway. There has to be more for you than that. Things have to matter for you more than that. There's got to be something bigger that you're living for, something better. Here's another piece of wisdom. He says money isn't in fact the best advantage in life. The best advantage in life is blessed is the man who perseveres under trial. Because when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life that God has promised to those who love him. Now, when James's audience read this phrase, the crown of life, they would immediately have thought of this kind of imagery. I forget this fellow's name, perhaps you know.
Charles Hamlin.
Charles who?
Hamlin.
Charles Hamlin. That really doesn't help me at all. Now I remember why I didn't bother learning it. So it's, yes, thank you. It's a great image, isn't it? And everything about the image says I've won. And so I've got a gold medal, and notice he's got a little bunch of flowers here, laurels. These were the flowers that athletes were given, or generals who won battles were given, or politicians who won elections were given at the moment of their victory. James's culture were very familiar with this. This is what he's referring to when he speaks of the crown of life. He says there's something about difficulties that adds value to your life. And when you've stood, do you ever go through stuff where all you can do is just stand and just not give up? You're not really making progress, you're just not giving up. And you keep going and you don't give up. There's something about coming through all that at the end of the day is an enormous victory. A victory so large that it requires this sort of imagery. He's saying to his friends, listen guys, life is a journey. And on that journey there's hard times. Of course there is. But when you stick with it, and when you make the tough choices, and when you doggedly organize your life around this Jesus is boss principle, then at the end you win. At the end you get an everlasting life that is different from this. So James is asking his friends, many of whom are in desperate circumstances, to think through the issue of worth. Living your life with Jesus as boss in difficult circumstances, he's saying, is worth it. Because this crown of life, whatever that is worth more than anything else. And so James would say that Christian spirituality, having a faith that works, is not a sentimental feeling. It is more often a moral choice. Happy is the man, James would say, who sticks with his faith when times are hard. Happy is the man who always tries to find out what right is and tries, however weakly, to do it. Because he knows that he is progressing towards something better, something deeper. He knows that in the end he gets to win. And then regarding moral choices, he then goes on to talk about the rather personal business of temptation. He says, now when tempted, I like this very much. I like that he says when tempted and not if tempted. There is a certain inevitability to feeling like doing something that you know you shouldn't do. Right? Okay. I've never experienced that either. I was just saying, there are some people, apparently, in other churches, better than this one, clearly. And those other people sometimes feel like doing stuff that they know they shouldn't do. And the word tempted here and the word trials are exactly the same word. And this makes sense because sometimes we feel pushed to the limit, not by circumstances that we're going through, but we feel pushed to the limit by stuff we really want to do. But no, we shouldn't. And James knows the danger of this. James, probably from his own experience, can remember times in his own life when he spoiled himself somehow by doing something that he knew he ought not to. And so he wants his readers to understand, in a very uncomplicated way, the mechanics of temptation. He says, when you're tempted, not if, when, no one should say, God is tempting me, because God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone. So very simple. If Jesus is your boss, temptation is what happens when you feel like doing something your boss wouldn't want you to do. And something to understand about this temptation is that whilst it is inevitable for all of us, it is also slightly unique for each of us. And so notice he says that each one is tempted when by his own desire he is dragged away and enticed. Excuse me a second. The faith that we read of in the Bible is desperately honest about this. I know in church sometimes you don't like talking about it, but the Bible talks about it openly. There is a part of you, and there is a part of me that wants to do wrong. It just is. That's life. And you think about it. You imagine it. You desire it. What that thing is to a certain extent unique for each of us. It is, it's different for each person, but we all have our own desires, and we may as well be honest about this, because when you're honest about it, you can then understand how it works. So you see that word enticed that he uses in this sentence. This is a hunting word. It means bait, literally. And in using this word, James is telling us something quite valuable about temptation. Why, think about it, why do fish bite hooks that have got worms on them? Anyone? Because they like worms. That's what fish are into. Worms are good. Temptation works on the premise that the wrong thing always gives the right pleasure. This is temptation. The wrong thing offers very real, very tangible, often very extraordinary pleasures. James just wants you to know that beneath those pleasures there often lurks a hook that stings and bites and damages. And so he says, after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin. And sin, when it is full grown, gives birth to death. James is saying here that temptation in and of itself is never sinful. Experiencing temptation doesn't mean that you're out of sync with Jesus. Indeed, I would argue that the contrary is true. I would be very suspicious of where a person was at if they never experienced temptation. A good, healthy spirituality, the Bible would say, is not indicated by an absence of temptation, but it may be indicated by a frequency of succumbing to it. One writer I read this week said that we're all involved in a continual and irreconcilable war, and we all bear the scars of that war, and we will bear them to the very gates of heaven. That's just the way it is. I think I'll save the rest for next week because it's great. Any questions on any of that? Yes?
It's confusing for me that God created us and God put us in these frames that derive pleasure out of various things. I mean, you have a drink and you get carefree and you laugh. I mean, we have sexual pleasures, we have all these different pleasures, but if you succumb to them, apparently it doesn't make any sense. Why would he create us to experience pleasure, and then according to the Bible, most of the pleasures we experience in one way or another is something you're supposed to try and avoid?
That's a good question. Yeah. Please be a bit more fair when you say you have sexual pleasures. Please try to bear in mind that some of us don't. There are the older congregation. Great question. So this is the great criticism of God, isn't it? We are created sick and yet commanded to be well. Right? That's it. Created to be bad, but commanded to be good. And it's a slightly biblically, it's a slightly untrue premise. Taking sex as an example, because it was the one that you used. The church has traditionally given the impression that there's something slightly suspect about sex and something slightly dirty about it, and somehow it unrelates to a decent Christian life. And that's the conscious and subconscious message that the church gives us. Biblically, that's nonsense, of course. In the Bible, sex is celebrated. Pleasure is celebrated as coming from God, as being his idea. Alcohol, the same thing. I mean, the Bible in parts speaks very positively about the gladdening effect that these things have on our life. So I think the God whom we discover in the Bible is extremely interested in pleasure. And I think the kind of Christianity that is most biblical is slightly hedonistic, in that we believe that God is good and that there is great pleasure to be had in life, following him every day, and those pleasures are tangible, they are real, they are enormous, and they are to be sought after. On the other hand, we all know that pleasures taken to excess, or pleasures experienced inappropriately, can be damaging. Take the buffet, for example. Right? We all like food. Food gives us pleasure. But yet we all, do we not, have an experience after being at a buffet of, I've just damaged myself. I loathe myself slightly now. I despise myself. That's just me, maybe, but does that answer your question? So the great criticism of God is that we are created sick and commanded to be well. It's not strictly true, although there is an aspect of truth to it. I'm not capable of living the life I know I should. I'm just not. The Bible calls this our flesh. There is a side to us that's always damaged, always scarred, always broken, and that'll be the case right up until the very gates of heaven. It just will. This is why we need Jesus. This is the whole point of the Christian faith. This was the point of the song Sammy and Kylie sang earlier. You can't be good on your own. You can't live a Christian life. It's impossible, actually. So you really need Jesus to die for you on the cross. Because if you're relying on your own morality and decency, you're screwed. Any other questions? One more. Oh, really? Okay.
We got another one. Nobody else is fine. In James, the part you quoted, was it just by chance that he referred to the humble would have a high life and the rich man would have a low life? Or, I mean, there's nothing in the Bible that I believe that states that having a lot of money or being successful will necessarily mean that you're going to live a low life thereafter.
Yes and no. The Bible is concerned about money. Yeah, okay, there's nothing wrong with earning a big wage, nothing wrong with wanting to earn an even bigger one. Fair enough. But the Bible is concerned about money because the Bible knows full well how easy it is for you and for me to say, well, I've got lots of money, so I don't really need anything. I don't really need Jesus to help me figure out life, because I've figured out life. I'm the king of the world. Everything works for me. Got all my ducks in a row. So it's actually quite hard for a person to have faith when life works amazingly well. Because when life works amazingly well, what do you need faith for? Because you've got it all figured out. This is why I think Jesus says it's actually quite difficult for a rich person to get into heaven. Not because heaven is opposed to rich people, but because rich people have a certain view of life, biblically speaking, that can sometimes be antithetical to faith. And that's a struggle we all have. I'm rich. We're all rich here. There aren't, we're not getting up in the morning and having to walk 10 miles for water. Do you know what I mean? Like we all have food in our cupboards. We don't have to pray for our next meal. And so we don't have to rely on God to quite the same extent that James's audience did. They were desperate indeed. Okay, I'm past my time. Let's go have a cup of coffee and see you next week. A cup of coffee here. I'm not taking your...
In your eyes. Oh no, I said too much. I set it up. That's me in the corner. That's me in the spotlight, losing my religion, trying to keep up with you. And I don't know if I can do it. Oh no, I've said too much. I haven't said enough. I thought that I heard you laughing. I thought that I heard you sing. I think I thought I saw you try. Every whisper of every waking hour, I'm choosing my confessions, trying to keep an eye on you, like a hurlos and blinded fool. Oh no, I've said too much. I set it up. Consider this, the hint of the century. Consider this, the slap that brought me to my knees. Fail, what if all these fantasies conflate around? Now I said too much. I thought that I heard you laughing. I thought that I heard you sing. I think I thought I saw you try. dream. That was just a dream. That's me in the corner. That's me in the spotlight, losing